Welcome back to OD Skills. Now, in the first weeks of this course, I introduced your course as organizational development skills as well as organizational design skills. Later, I introduced the possibility of organizational diversity skills. They all work. For the last third of your course, for the next several lectures, I would like to focus on, sadly but necessary, what I will call organizational distress, even disaster skills. Because the sad reality in this country and increasingly around the world today is that anyone interested in organizational NCRP needs to be prepared for the very worst of conflict, violence. Now, I would like to share a bit of my history, my expertise for talking to you about organizational violence. And then, for those of you who have not taken my Theories of Conflict course with the Holding These Truths Handbook, I will be introducing the beginning of a model of escalating destructive conflict that peaks in violent conflict. My reason for doing this is to show you the power of the skills that you are learning in NCRP. And I will be asking you the next several weeks to practice these skills in real life with people of your choice, because I don't believe you can actually taste or experience the power of these skills in the real world unless you actually use them. And of course, you must keep using them to a point where you get feedback from many people that you are masterful in these skills in order to reap the most important rewards. We have professionals in this country and around the world who are trained to mediate, de-escalate, and diffuse violent conflict. And police are front and center in this group. Military is another, though military is a bit more complicated in the recent decade. Decade and a half, we have seen more of military inciting and escalating violent conflict rather than the de-escalation containment role. I have practiced neither role, but I still have a professional background that has required expertise in diffusing, de-escalating violent conflict. As many of you know, I was trained as a lawyer and became a trial litigator representing public schools with what has been generational conflict involving weapons and violence in urban schools. This is not something that just started in recent years. We have simply been refusing to effectively counter the risk factors, and so it has been reaching increasingly tragic proportions. But for any of you who've grown up in Chicago, LA, New York City schools, this is a long-standing challenge. My mother was a student in the Chicago area schools, and there were weapons and violence in the school at that time. So when I became a litigator representing schools, this was nothing new. Not only was I asked to intervene with students bringing weapons into the schools, but also other disciplinary concerns, oftentimes expulsion, suspension, special education concerns, and broader administrative school board concerns. My legal training was added to a foundation of doing community education in the poorest of neighborhoods. And so I not only grew up in an inner city urban neighborhood, but I also spent several years of my life trying to serve the youth who were growing up in the poorest, most violent neighborhoods. Part of my training, I have a degree in nonprofit administration, but I included a bit of family and child therapy as my training, and I also had extensive group work training, so I was prepared to do therapeutic intervention as well. Some of you are considering marital and family therapy as a concurrent degree with NCRP. Some of you go on and get a master's in social work. Others are police officers or those who have served extensively in the military. You all understand bits and pieces of the training education I'm describing to you. After leaving my litigation post and working with weapons in the school and all these different concerns, a juvenile treatment facility approached me and asked if I would design a program, a treatment program for repeat violent offenders ages 10 to 17. I embraced this opportunity. And because I am a mediator as well as a lawyer, I wanted mediation to be at the heart of this program, and discovered that mediation, when it is embedded in every aspect of organizational life, masterfully diffuses, de-escalates, and contains violence. No question. We saw a dramatic reduction in violence, but everyone needed to be immersed in these skills, given feedback. It was a daily kind of practice. It wasn't just an emergency crisis practice. I truly believe in the power of what we're teaching you in NCRP with diffusing, de-escalating violent conflict. Not surprisingly, after I spent several months, years of my life, I was often asked if I would do related work. For example, the Department of Justice funded a national no violence curriculum for middle school students. This was about 20 years ago, and I was hired to be the lead researcher and designer of this curriculum, incorporating all of my experience. I also was asked to mediate in going postal-like situations where terminated long-term employees who were struggling with mental illness. One in particular had a long military history and a love of weapons and guns. Were involved in some very potentially dangerous conflict. And I did not mediate these conflicts alone. I worked very closely with labor unions, police officers, ethics officers, managers, everybody involved, lawyers, in order to de-escalate, diffuse. But we were able to do that. And later, when I first was asked to teach, the graduate program in social work at the University of Denver introduced me to their faculty, who was an expert in what they called managing the dangerous client. And as he was retiring, they asked me if I would study with him, learn his wisdom, his years of research, scholarship, and teaching, and take over his class, which I did for the years I was at the University of Denver. So this is some of my background for showing you how what you're learning in NCRP is powerfully prepared, capable of tackling the toughest of your organizational challenges. Now, I decided to conclude your course with this because you've been introduced to many possibilities, many different organizational roles. But this truly grounds you in the skills and using all the skills you're learning in our program. And I want to do this over a course of 4 weeks to give you enough time to practice various skills on a weekly basis and discover the power for yourself. Let me turn to my PowerPoint now to introduce you to my model of escalating destructive conflict. This is a model that I developed many years ago to help my students understand what I do when I'm in the face of violent conflict. I'm hoping we will turn to the PowerPoint in a minute. If not, I will introduce it to you next week. But let me talk about what you would see if you could see the PowerPoint right now. You would see a bell curve. And at the peak, at the top of that bell curve is violent conflict. At the beginning of that bell curve, at the very bottom, there is no conflict at all. And that is what I want to talk about the remainder of today. Some of the theories, and those of you who have taken theories of conflict with me, you have been introduced to this model in my workbook, and you're going to find the pages that are in your reader in that workbook, as well as activities to help you with practicing and understanding these stages, these steps of escalating destructive conflict. At the very bottom level, before there is any conflict at all, I need to talk about, we've talked about diversity and the importance of embracing diversity to create innovation, organizational innovation, organizational best. That's the great, wonderful potential of our diverse workplaces and organizations. But the reality that most of us deal with and struggle with every day is that diversity can be a source of vast misunderstanding, easily incited conflict when truly no conflict exists. There's just cultural difference, misunderstanding, triggering that conflict. And as mediators, as peace builders, as organizational ombuds or facilitators, consultants, coaches, we must be prepared to help all organizational stakeholders explore cultural difference in great detail in order to fully and deeply appreciate the vast potential for conflict and misunderstanding. Let me give you a theory to help you with this. Psychologist Albert Ellis, years ago, created a theory that he called root expectations. And this is not simply every expectation that we bring to the table in our daily lives. This is what is deeply embedded in us, probably by the age of 1 or 2, and oftentimes we are unconscious of our expectation until it has been violated, disappointed, disturbed. So I will tell my students, I believe, as a sibling with 2 brothers, 2 sisters in a big family, and as one of the older siblings, I embedded in my unconscious a root expectation that life should be fair. Now, Albert Ellis would tell you that the problem with these root expectations is they don't match with real world life. We all know as adults that life is not fair. It can be grossly unfair and unjust. But because I've internalized this as an older sibling, probably, prodded by my parents and encouraged by my siblings, even tormented, to ensure their older sibling would be fair, I just carry this around in me, and I'm not even aware of the expectation until some type of injustice, unfair action occurs in front of me, and then I get upset. Well, if you can imagine that culture for each one of us gives us, I would say, hundreds of these root expectations as part of our maturation, socialization process. I mean, that is what our parents and our cultures, our families, our communities, our churches are teaching us and embedding in us. So we are walking, each one of us, a walking mass of root expectations, and we expect the rest of the world to be like we expect, to be like our parents, to be like our siblings, to be like our cultural groups, our communities. And when they are not, we are likely to get upset and say there is conflict, simply because of cultural difference. So in a couple of weeks, I will be recommending some tools for navigating this landmine of expectations, and what often adds to the escalation of conflict in the face of these expectations. But for now, I will say everything you have learned in NCRP about suspending judgment, keeping an open mind, and doing excellent information gathering to fully and deeply understand the other will help your organizations begin to explore all of these cultural differences together. Enough for now. Have a good week.